Okay, welcome to the final session of Resist and Rebel, Intifada Revolution. My name's Matt, and we have Ian Rintoul and Midhat to bring the conference home. I'll invite Ian to speak first, and then we'll come to Midhat. Ian.
I don't really need to. I don't need to use this time. Yeah. Look, we'll do a little solidarity photo at the end of the session with the bad laws need to be broken, and we'll send to the CFMEU, just a little warning about that. Look, I was a little bit of a blow-in as far as this session is concerned. When we put the agenda together, we had no idea at that stage, I don't know why we weren't consulted, about the attack on the CFMEU. Of course, if we had been consulted, there wouldn't have been an attack on the CFMEU and we wouldn't need to have this session, but there has been, and given the scale of the attack, it's been quite important to think that we found some way of raising it at the meeting. People would have seen the articles that have gone around, and now that yesterday with the appointment of the administrators, the physical consequences, the material consequences of the attack, I think are now going to be felt. The government has removed the secretary. I haven't got them all in my head at the moment, but has appointed a national administrator and has removed all of the leading figures, the elected figures of all the branches of the CFMEU. The good thing is that we now know that on Tuesday there will be strikes, and certainly a strike and demonstration in Queensland, probably a strike and demonstration in the ACT, and probably a strike and demonstration in Victoria. New South Wales, there's a delegates meeting tomorrow. Maybe they'll get around to doing that. So it's very good that there actually is some kind of response, given that it's been very, very clear what the government has been doing, what they've been preparing to do, for some considerable time. But the scale of it, I don't think is really appreciated in the union movement. Perhaps I don't think it's appreciated. It's kind of wider than the union movement either. In our articles, we've said very clearly that it is the biggest attack, since the 80s, since the Labor Party deregistered the Builders Labourers Federation. It was at the time. I think it is at least as the equivalent with what the Labor Party's deregistration of the builders' labourers. And I think we need to be clear, actually, it's for very, very similar reasons. I did have a little printout of Bob Hawke's speech in the Parliament. At the time, he was deregistering the BLF, and it was full of the same kind of things that we hear about the CFMEU at the moment, that they're lawless, they're a law unto themselves. They're not prepared to adhere to the general requirements of construction, industry. They were a rogue. They didn't appreciate to work in with the other unions. There was a whole that was full of it. Of course, at the time, the Labor Party was particularly upset with the builders' labourers because they were breaking the accord that the Labor Party had put in place between the government, the unions, and the employers as a way in which they were going to that was the way in which they were going to actually cut wages is what they did. They didn't put it in those terms, but that's what it was about. It was a social agreement, the accord between those three parties to actually keep wages down. But most of all, it was about industrial peace. And I think the other thing which I think is very telling, about the accord, and it's worth bearing in mind, I think, as things have gone on, because they put what Hawke said very bluntly, and he'd been the secretary of president of the ACTU before he left there to become leader of the Labor Party. But he was talking at the beginning of the 80s, and said actually when there's a recession, you don't need the recession itself is a discipline on the unions. It's not when you don't get wage breakouts in the recession. It's not at that time you need an accord. You're going to need an accord actually when things improve. So there was even at that time there was a view that the accord arrangement was actually about how you were going to discipline the union, how you're going to rein in the union, how you're going to make it, more compliant for business in Australia, and that's exactly what it did. I'm not going to go into a long thing about that, but from the experience from the implementation of the Accord and the willingness of the Labor government and of the ACTU and the other unions at the time to go along with the Accord, they were quite willing to deregister the builders' labourers when they thought the builders' labourers were willing to go outside of the Accord to take industrial action at a time when the Labor government was insisting that there was going to be industrial peace. So they did that in 86. They deregistered the builders' labourers in 86, and is it 89? Is it 89? I think they used the Air Force to actually break the pilots when the pilots, another section of the more obscure section of the union, perhaps looked like they were going to looked like they went for wage increases outside of the Accord as well. So, but I think the willingness of the Labor government to take this kind of action, I think is an indication what came subsequently. So we had the Accord, then we had the enterprise bargaining, and again, it was a very, very explicit argument from Labor that by imposing enterprise bargaining and all the kind of restrictions that have gone along with enterprise bargaining, it was a way of disciplining, the union movement, of tying the union movement to the enterprise, to particular enterprises, to the benefits and the productivity of their particular employers. The laws that came subsequently banned solidarity action, banned had already been banned. Secondary boycott action. It banned industry-wide action, and ultimately put restrictions about when you could actually go on strike. And I think, although the United States like to think perhaps is the most regulated union, has got the most regulated workforce, labour force, I think there's very good reasons to see Australia actually as having certainly it's one of the most regulated labour forces, and the restriction on the right to strike has become absolutely manifest. I think the Labor's been actually fairly clever about the way it's actually implemented the administration. So, for example, it's left Zack Smith as who was the national secretary of the CFMEU. It's left him in place. It's removed all powers, so he's not actually sacked in the way that Darren Greenfield and Rita Marley in New South Wales have actually been sacked. He's become a cipher. Zack Smith remains a cipher in the national secretary of the CFMEU and in the ACT branch, and it may well be that under the legislation, although it is a minimum of 3 years, of actually there will be administration for a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5. If the administration decides within that time, they can actually reduce the amount of time for the administration. So it looks to me that they may well be looking at the ACT branch and the Western Australian branch of re-establishing their branches at some point before the 3 years. At least that option is there. But what it has done, and when you look at who they've appointed the administrators, and I don't know them all, but for example, they've now the administrator in Victoria is actually Graham McCulloch, who was formerly the secretary of the NTEU. And looks like, I've forgotten the name, Phil someone or other in New South Wales. They've gone for people with some kind of credentials in the labour movement as labour lawyers. The guy in New South Wales is well known by CFMEU, by the MUA and a range of other unions as a lawyer that's operated has worked for the unions, some kind of commitment to the unions. So it's a way of trying to, what's the word? Gild the lily, make the silk purse out of the sow's ear. Yeah, no, okay. Lipstick on a pig, how's that? Yeah, okay, something like that. Yeah. So to make it look like it is not as drastic as what it is. But the power of the administrator, although at the moment they've only sacked the secretaries and presidents of those branches, the fact is that the administrator has the power to sack anybody. So the organisers haven't been sacked as of Friday, but come Monday, or Tuesday or Wednesday, but at some point the possibility of actually sacking a whole range of organisers is the kind of power that the administrator has got. What that means, for example, is that in Queensland almost all the organisers have already had their right of entry removed from them. Now, that right of entry, it's because they've done bad things, that they've broken laws. They've been on building sites when they shouldn't have been on building sites. They've been taken to Fair Work, for example, as a consequence of something that they've done on a particular building site or at a picket line or something else, and their right of entry has been removed by the Fair Work administration. Now, under the rules, there's a possibility of someone like that, under the rules of the administration, someone like that can actually be banned for life from holding a position as a bargaining agent for another union. So the kind of powers that have been given to the administration are absolutely extraordinary. And I think in that respect, we do need to understand that the Fair Work Act, it is impossible to be a good delegate or a good organiser and not break the laws that are associated with the Fair Work Act. And I think that we need to be very clear about that. Why it matters, I was also going to say, when Hawke died in 2019, there was a lot of outpouring of, sycophantic, rubbish about Hawke and his beer sculling days and everything else like that. But when you trawl through, the accolades and so forth, there was one interesting one that came from the New South Wales Building Commissioner, who said that it wasn't going to be said very many places, but it needed to be said that the greatest thing that Bob Hawke ever did was to deregister the Builders Labourers Federation. And that for that reason alone, he deserved, sort of a gold medal, from Australia for his services to, the master builders and the construction industry. Yeah. Okay. So why does it? So that matters. It matters enormously. In the 80s, when the builders' labourers was sacked, the one thing that they haven't got now that they had then, it was a union that was going to actually take the builders' labourers' job. In the 80s, the BWIU was quite willing to poach the builders' labourers, membership, and to play the role at the behest of the Labor government of actually breaking the union. But the thing that there was in the 80s, which I'm not quite so sure now, was that there was a level of workplace organisation that meant that after the deregistration actually happened, there was in Victoria and New South Wales, I'm not so sure about other places, and probably in the ACT, but a series of actually pitched battles at building sites over the right of builders' labourers to have jobs, on those building sites. And other people might be able to tell some of the stories in Victoria, but where the horses and the police, I know in one case there was one builders' labour had every rib broken, on one of the picket lines as the police used horses to break the builders' labourers' picket lines to break the builders' labourers union. Up and down George Street, you can walk down George Street, you can look at all the buildings all the way down to the quay. At almost every single one of them, there were picket lines that we were on at the same kind of time. As the master builders trying to keep the builders' labourers off. I'm not so sure that we've got that degree of workplace organisation, now that we're going to, that in terms of what happens with the administration, how much the union is actually, going to fight. But I think it may well be that we're going to see the same kind of trench warfare that we saw, subsequently. For a lot of the workers, and some of us were out at the ETEX picket line, last week. For a lot of the CFMEU guys they're on strike, not a building site, they had no idea about what's happening to the CFMEU and no view either about what it meant for them in terms of their organisation. But they should be under no illusion. And we need to understand that to get it across about why it is so important. Because while the government talks about criminality and bikies and the need to get criminals out of the union, need to make the building industry safe for people to organise in and so forth, the master builders are very, very clear what is at stake. So you look at the Herald Sun today, the master builders are saying they want all the EBAs of the CFMEU actually reviewed. They want them all torn up. So the question of the conditions, the conditions that they fought for, the questions of the jobs, the cost of living and so forth are all up for grabs. The final thing, while it matters, I think, It's just that we talk particularly about Palestine. We've talked a lot about why the unions mattered and the kind of work that the unions did in South Africa or Vietnam, actually mattered in terms of that struggle. And in that respect, there is a very, very proud history which we rightly talk about. The importance of the industrial action that was taken, on the wharves and other places to support the fight in South Africa or to oppose the Vietnam War. Now that right to strike has already gone, as I said, as a consequence of what Labor Party did with the Accord, with the enterprise bargaining, and the Fair Work Act. It's already been the case that we've had to raise the issue about if we are going to fight, to raise the issues about the unions doing the kind of thing which they did about South Africa and Vietnam, then we had to fight for the right to strike. The attack on the CFMEU and putting the CFMEU administration, I think, puts that back, a little bit further. Because it's come very, very clear when you've got, a labour movement generally, and that's what we have got, in the same way we had in the 80s, the labour movement generally has collaborated. I mean, it's absolute shame and disgrace, that the ACTU has gone along with this. And Paddy reported earlier, in spite of moves, the NTU at their national thing has rejected the idea of, standing up for the CFMEU, as well. But that's why it matters. It matters for the CFMEU. It matters for the class. It matters for the fights about Palestine and other kinds of things. So just lastly, I think it's just that it is one of those issues. I think we talked about the way in which AUKUS was an albatross around the Labor Party's neck. People voted Labor because they didn't want Morrison. They voted Labor because they wanted something different. We've now got AUKUS, we've now got Palestine, and we've now got the CFMEU. I'm not saying that it's going to be, the final nail in Labor's coffin or anything like that, but what it does mean is that the importance of building, a revolutionary alternative, a socialist alternative. I mean, one of the differences it would have made. I mean, we've got comrades in various places have been able to move resolutions, get petitions, organised in the way that we can. If we had one Solidarity comrade, on every building site in Sydney, if we had more Solidarity comrade in every CFMEU worksite around the place, that this fight would look somewhat different to what it is at the moment. But it is a fight that matters. It is a fight that matters for the future of the union movement, for the organisation of the class. It's a fight that matters in terms of arguing about what a real socialist organisation looks like and what kind of socialist organisation we need to build. So you'll hear more about it as we come on. We'll try to get to all the meetings that are happening this week. We'll have a leaflet, be able to distribute it at all the strikes and rallies. We'll produce a broadsheet that will actually try to get to all the CFMEU workplaces we can, but as many other places as we can as well.
We now have Midhat Jafri. She's a university student at the University of New South Wales and an activist and a member of Solidarity. She's going to talk about Palestine, the Palestine movement in the universities in Sydney and globally.
Thank you, comrades. So I'm just going to be talking about, as Matt highlighted, the global Palestine movement, what students have been up to at the universities, responses to capitalism and imperialism, both in Sydney and Australia, globally, and what we need to do to continue the fight. Since October 7th, Israel has launched a campaign of death and destruction in Palestine, spreading its offense from Gaza into neighboring countries like Lebanon. The Albanese government has shamefully maintained its support of the Israeli state's maneuvers, justifying its assault on schools, hospitals, and universities as self-defense. Their support has remained steadfast despite the ICJ not only ruling that there is a plausible case for genocide, but also declaring Israel an apartheid state, and this was talked about in the first session. One of the main focuses of the Sydney Palestine movement recently has been the militarization of universities, institutions which proclaim themselves as paragons of innovation and community and progress. But disgracefully, the University of Sydney, for example, has remained completely silent and continues its exchange relationships with Israel, like with Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv University, all of which are deeply integrated in Israel's system of genocide and apartheid. These Israeli universities have strong links with the IDF and with Israeli weapons companies who are producing the technology used to kill Palestinians. The HUJ, where USID sends students as part of its OLES 2155 Experience Israel Unit, runs the Havatsalot program for the IDF Intelligence Corps, training elite intelligence officers, and the Talpiot program, which researches new technology for the IDF. USID also maintains ties with weapons manufacturers that support and arm Israel. Companies like Safran, Thales, and Lockheed Martin all have active partnerships with USID and help develop technology and weapons to aid Israel in its genocide. These ties are likely to expand in the future as USID seeks to integrate itself into the rollout of AUKUS nuclear submarines programs, pushing for a war with China. We've talked about USID throughout this session, but I want to touch quickly on UNSW as a UNSW student myself. UNSW as a university was created to facilitate research weapons during World War II and has extremely strong ties with weapons companies like Lockheed Martin, like Raytheon, like Quickstep, involving students themselves in the process of developing IP and research to sell to Israel. The funding of these projects has allowed for the opening of facilities like the Nuclear Innovation Hub, which opened in February earlier this year, which we protested. Another example of this is the design for Boeing munitions found in the Rafah tent massacre. They came directly from the UNSW Faculty of Science. A PhD advisor, Sarah something, I don't even want to know your name, she was the one who helped facilitate research by guiding PhD students to help develop design for this, for munitions for Boeing. But the thing is, we're at the stage of the genocide that the horrors of imperialism are being exposed, and the true face of Israel as nothing but a bloodhound for Western interests has become abundantly clear for the world to see. The utter disregard for life and the hellish destruction unleashed by the West, as we saw today with Sanjay's presentation, speaks to the nefarious interests of capital and the lengths that it is willing to go to achieve its interests. The rise of the global far right is also closely linked with the crises of late-stage capitalism, where stark economic inequalities and social insecurities are exacerbated. In this system, our government can find $368 billion for nuclear submarines, but make drastic cuts to NDIS, leave public schools with less funding than private schools, and won't guarantee nurses ratios, for example, during a time of record-breaking inflation. Cost of living is through the roof. It is in this framework that the support for Israel's imperialist policies by far-right groups in other countries can be understood as an extension of global alliances of capitalist interests, where reactionary forces collaborate to maintain the global capitalist order and suppress resistance. The response from around the world, however, has been revolutionary. The Palestine movement has reinvigorated a revolutionary struggle all across the world. 10 months into this genocide, there is a growing sense for the need of an international resistance movement. Students have planted Gaza solidarity encampments all around the world. People have been rallying day in, day out for months. Workers have defied anti-strike laws in Australia. American voters have hijacked the Democratic National Convention. The CFMEU, as Ian highlighted, has struck out in solidarity with students camping at ANU. The NTEU was mobilized, which brought results like the vote from the USID branch to cut ties with Israeli institutions and divest from weapons companies. Similar motions which were passed overwhelmingly at UNSW, which the NTEUI joined recently, and the UniMelb NTEU branch. The Palestine movement has also extended solidarity with the struggle of Bangladeshi students against their repressive government. Palestinian flags have appeared at pickets at MIT and HTC, protest pickets in Melbourne. In Atlanta, resistance against Cop City has identified the links between the police state at home and the genocide overseas. In Japan, protests have gone from a lone man going on hunger strike to thousands of people rolling out in the streets of Shibuya. And here in Sydney, the same campus where only months ago the mention of resistance would have just put us on Salem witch trials. We got 800 students to vote in favor to support armed resistance. Not only that, but to support pushing for a one-state solution. And at the center, round of applause. And at the center of this has been our group, Solidarity. We have been central to resisting the militarization of our universities and its complicity in genocide. On the 19th of March, USID organized an exchange expo with universities across the world, including Tel Aviv University, which recruits students to work with Israeli weapons manufacturers. We occupied the building until the vice president of Tel Aviv University left the building. Tel Aviv later went on Israeli news and threatened to cut ties with Sydney Uni. We played a central part in building the Gaza Solidarity encampment that was launched on the 23rd of April, conducting protest tours where we took students around campus, highlighting the buildings where the university has ties to the apartheid state. This included the Sydney Nano Institute, where Ben Eggleton's research groups, his research goons, conduct research with Lockheed Martin, facilitate something called the Smart Sensing Labs, the US Studies Center and its focus on promoting American imperialism, and by extension the Israeli apartheid state, and F23, where the bosses enable these ties. Amongst this encampment, we faced a plethora of issues. All of the student comrades here have testified to that, and you can talk to them afterwards. Not only were we facing issues from management, from the media, from condemnations coming left, right, and center from global media sources, but also internally. We had to face sectarianism, we had to face Islamophobia, we had struggles pushing for our strategy of mass mobilization when talks of private negotiation talks was happening. But amidst this, we realized that there is this appetite, there is a potential for students to be mobilized at this campus. And with that in mind, excuse my French, we busted ass building for the student general meeting on the 7th of August. Locked in. We were put up with arbitrary deadlines by the SRC president, none of which were necessary, but we still pushed forth. And on the historic student general meeting on the 7th of August, where we moved an additional motion recognizing Palestinians' right to resist under international law and calling for a singular, secular, democratic Palestinian state. With 800 students showing up, our motion passed with an extremely overwhelming majority, sharpening the politics of the movement. And the reason why this was successful was because we were pushing this argument to students that the necessity of this motion is that it gives the SGM teeth. Recognizing that the university needs to cut ties, fine. We were yelling that, hitting pots and pans the entire encampment. But that motion in of itself doesn't have the teeth when you have an actual look at the investment portfolios and you realize USID doesn't actually have that much investment. It focuses more on research. But politically, what something like the second motion that we pushed for can do is give the movement teeth. Shunning, this is the same management that shuns us, has called ASIO on Muslim students to investigate them, and has also, in part, been the reason why the cap has been rolled out. The one-state motion actually pushed against the complacency and complicity of the university in legitimizing the existence of Israel through its ties to Israeli institutions and research, and the research it does for weapons manufacturers. All of this is key to what we bring to the student movement, but a lot of times when we talk to people at stalls, they often have questions about what role management plays in legitimizing Israel. Or they would point out the hypocrisy of Australia calling itself a democratic country whilst unconditionally supporting an apartheid regime, something that's internationally recognized by the ICJ. We respond that Israel's genocide is not just an action of one criminal state. It is only possible with the support of the criminal imperialist order dominated by the US with Australia's support. And that order is the product of the criminal capitalist system that, as Marx said, began its existence by dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. The interest of the international ruling class is actively contradictory to the interests of the international working class. They will utilize all kinds of ideological nonsense to demoralize the working class, convince us that an alternative future is not possible, divide it with racism, nationalism, sexism, all bigotries, as we have discussed before and as Ian just highlighted. It's the same reason, it's the same thing why the aftermath of the Arab revolts in the 1930s, when Palestinians needed a working class revolution, the ruling class snubbed the opportunity for socialism by legitimizing the Israeli state. This is the same Western interest that for thousands of years put Jewish communities to the side, had rife anti-Semitism, othered them to no degree, was the reason why it enabled the Holocaust, and now suddenly you care about the well-being of Jewish people. No, it was very clearly to snub any opportunity of any real revolutionary action happening in the Middle East and the geopolitical strategical value of the Middle East to Western interests. This is why we are continuing to see investment in weapons research and the increasing militarization of universities, among skyrocketing cost of living, losses in welfare, black deaths in custody, climate destruction, refugee crises, and mandates on women's reproductive health. When capitalism encounters crises, the system collapses on itself. This collapse is precisely why something like AUKUS has been rolled out. It is part of the biggest military build-up in the region since World War II. The nuclear submarines deal has come alongside Labour's planned imperialist expansion of US bases in Australia and its own sub-imperialism in the Pacific. This is why, in the face of resistance, the ruling class sends its police thugs to pound in the heads of teenage pro-Palestine protesters or massacre hundreds of student protesters in Bangladesh. In the case of USUD, the ruling class has ruled out draconian campus access policy, the draconian campus access policy, which places heavy restrictions on the right of students to protest. We, however, have directly defied this policy since the start of the semester in such numbers that the policy has not been able to be implemented or used to discipline anyone yet. In the case of Australia in general, the ruling class is passing bills to smash the CFMEU, as Ian discussed, trying to snuff out the spark of militant action. This is administration's naked attempt to break one of the strongest unions in Australia. It is an attack on unions in general, and it is an attack on the working class as a whole. The reason why Albanese is trying to break the CFMEU is because the CFMEU is willing to break the industrial laws which criminalize strikes. Strikes! Like, we're supposed to be living in a democracy where you're able to go on to strike if you want to engage in industrial bargaining. You should be able to express those democratic rights, but that being frozen, that being completely criminalized, just only shows you that liberalism is only a synonym for fascism. They do it to defend their own members, and they did it when CFMEU members stopped work to defend the Gaza Solidarity encampment at ANU. We need a movement that makes it possible for the Albanese government and our vice-chancellors and bosses to stop completely cut its support for genocide. Albanese supports Israel due to the position of Australia as a component of the American empire. The ruling class of Australia supports American proxies in the Middle East so that America will support Australia's own imperial interests in Polynesia and the Pacific Islands. However, the genocidal complicity has the potential to intensify class struggle within imperial powers. The working class of Australia does not benefit from the genocide in Gaza and has everything to win by smashing the state which legitimizes and sponsors such violence. We need to fan the flames of this struggle and turn it into a political crisis, just like the anti-war movements of World War I and the Vietnam War. And we need to look at the power the workers have. It is production. This is something that B highlighted in a previous session. It is the power that workers have in the production that they create, the production that they engage in. It is the exploitative, alienated labor relations that keep the profits going, hence keeping the ruling class's understanding and organization of the world going. This is why we can't look at self-proclaimed countries of, oh, look at us, we're anti-imperialist legacies, like China, like Iran, because China is the same country that only recently called on to Fatah to broker a deal, consolidating its own imperial interests by getting 14 Palestinian political groups, including the PFLP, PLO, who have had significant divides since the Oslo Accords. This is not because China actually cares about Palestinian liberation. It's so that it's an opportunistic maneuver so that it can consolidate its own interests, because they're seeing that the entire world is tired of Western imperialism. We know what? Time for a new flavor of imperialism. Let's go to China. Imperialism can only be fought with an anti-imperialist movement, and an anti-imperialist movement has to oppose countries like China, oppose countries like the US, the UK, oppose the global ruling class, oppose the Albanese government. We need to welcome any dissent in the ALP, like we saw with Fatima Payman, and this was brought up in other sessions, to broaden the movement, weaken Albanese, and build power and confidence to stop business as usual. We need to resist against management trying to drive us into the mud. We need to fight the media when they try to equate supporting legitimate resistance to terrorism. We need to fight the war on terror levels of Islamophobia and racism this genocide has inspired. We need to not only fight Albanese, and we need to fight not only Albanese, not only the US and Israel, but capitalism itself, the system that is furthering this divide and attempting to fracture the working class. That is the only way to stop this genocide, defeat imperialism once and for all, and create a world of genuine peace and equality. We need to globalize the Intifada, bring revolutionary organization to every school, every university, every workplace, and fight until we win. No war but class war. We will show you how a revolution looks like. Thank you.